Joining us now is ICT's Mark Trahant. Delana Studi talked about what's driving this strike, how different it is, and what some of the implications are for Indigenous writers and actors. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Aaliyah. Imagine getting a job as an extra on a Hollywood film. You might work for a week and then be on screen for just minutes or seconds. But many in Hollywood have a different vision. Using artificial intelligence, an actor would go into the studio, be scanned, and then an artificially created actor would be in the shot. One day of scan time and a lot less work for the actor. That's one of the issues driving this strike. Turns out there's a lot of history. I sat down with Liza Black, author of Picture Indians, Hollywood Native Americans in Film, 1941 through 1960.
Film history is pretty fascinating because Native people were part of the film industry from the very beginning, going back to the late 19th century. Some of the first moving images included Native people. So Native people have always been part of the film industry. But what has changed a lot is how the industry has organized itself in terms of labor. So in the late 19th century and the early 20th century, there was less of a hierarchy. There was more opportunities for all kinds of people to be involved in the film industry, including Native people. And some of that has been documented by Michelle Verhaja and Joanna Hearn, showing how you had folks who were from Native communities writing, acting, directing films prior to, say, the Great Depression. After those years, though, you see a tremendous amount of hierarchy being introduced into Hollywood in terms of extras, in terms of these, gradations of categories of actors, supporting actors, bit players, and the tremendous class distinctions between those folks of people and how much they got paid. And so when you brought this into what some of us call Indian country, when studios visited reservations and hired Native people on reservations, that same pay structure got imposed onto Native people. The continuity I see there is that, yes, streaming has allowed corporations, meaning places like Netflix and Hulu, to make a lot of money off of a hit show or movie by streaming it kind of endlessly. The continuity, though, is that even in the period I'm looking at, which is more the mid-20th century, the 1940s and the 1950s, you could have a situation where a star didn't quite get much pay for a particular film or television series that ends up doing well, right? Because actors are paid according to how they think a product will do. So the actor negotiates their contract before they do the work. They do the work, then the work is released. They've already been paid at that point. So they may have been paid far less than how the movie did. And that's what you see today sort of being exaggerated because streaming allows for such a massive audience if a film or television show finds an audience.
One of the fun stories in your book that I thought was fascinating is how instead of a union, it was the Bureau of Indian Affairs negotiating a contract at one point.
Yes. You see this in a few cases, especially with the Navajo reservation, where the Bureau of Indian Affairs is involved in these negotiations, and Navajo women trying to get involved in that and make their own play for what they wanted, which of course got swept aside in the end. But yeah, you had the Bureau of Indian Affairs right in there, corresponding with studios like Warner Brothers and RKO. Right. I mean, I think people should be thinking about how historic it is, this moment we're in right now, where you have the well-paid portion of Hollywood siding with the lower paid or severely underpaid workers in Hollywood. That's historic. And I think people interested in Native representation should be thinking about how can Native people become part of this conversation about challenging the inequities in Hollywood, as well as the underrepresentation of Native people in Hollywood.
This moment in history, I mean, in a way, it's unique in the sense that you have so many folks getting representation for the first time with really mainstream productions, and Res Dogs would be a great example of that. Does that change the equation at all for the union role?
Mm. Yes and no. I mean, I think that this is going to sound just so terrible, but it's what I truly believe. I think that moment, that Res Dogs and Rutherford Falls movement is over. I think that those works were in the pipeline prior to the global protests in 2020 against police violence. But I really feel that the studios only greenlighted those projects, truly greenlighted them, really funded them, really got it going and put it out there because of 2020. And we've already seen that Rutherford Falls got canceled and Res Dogs is also coming to a close. So Res Dogs had a longer run than Rutherford Falls, but I don't feel optimistic that Hollywood is going to continue with where they were going. I worry that they gave Native people the attention they've been screaming for centuries, and that moment has come to an end because white audiences aren't demanding it the way they were in 2020 and 2021.
Last question, do you think this will go on a long time?
I do. I do think this will go on a long time because I think the streaming feels so very different to people. I think this really sort of increases the sense of injustice. And I think that there's a really strong degree of outrage at corporations like Netflix and Hulu, but also we're just seeing a lot of strikes in a lot of sectors. So I think the mood has changed in America. I really do. And I think workers are fed up. So I think that they're not going to bow down to any concessions made by the studios anytime soon.
Liza Black, thank you.
My goodness, Mark, I'm so struck that so many of these strikes go far beyond Hollywood. They actually reach into AI.
And generative artificial intelligence is one of those things that's really going to change everything. And you think just about the impact on Hollywood. Storytelling has always been impacted by technological changes. A great example of that is when talking movies came out. They used to have large orchestras, and all those orchestras lost their jobs because suddenly movies had soundtracks. Multiply that times several factor, and you're seeing what AI will do. And one for Indigenous communities that's terrifying is that Hollywood could go in and take a look at all of the reports from all of the anthropologists in history and make up ceremonies for movies and have them constructed artificially with no one saying, you can't do that.
Beyond Hollywood, what are some of the other issues with AI that you're seeing right now?
Well, with all technologies, there's always pluses and minuses. On the plus side, one that would be extraordinary would be to plug in all of the data about missing and murdered Indigenous women and relatives and be able to have the computer search through all the files and come up with ways of categorizing things in real time much faster than we can do now. That's a plus sign. On the downside is the ability to have AI create news stories and have it saying, here's your script for tomorrow, it's all done, right when you walk in the door.
We know that right now lawmakers are feeling a lot of pressure because there are very few regulations around AI, but what are you hearing in that regard?
Well, both lawmakers and tribal governments. I mean, this is also an issue for tribal governments to define what they own and what the intellectual property is that's owned by Indigenous people, and how to put that into the discourse is really important.
I think so many people hear about AI and they get really frightened. Can this technology be stopped?
It's really hard to stop any new technology. I mean, you're already seeing it in very simple things like autonomous cars. In fact, one thing going on in San Francisco right now that's really fascinating is there's a group trying to stop AI cars from driving around San Francisco. And they're doing that by placing orange cones in front of the cars. And the cars cannot navigate when there's an orange cone there. So people are fighting back, but it's very difficult because it reduces costs so much that companies are saying, we got to do this.
So do you think that this is something that tribal government should be looking at and seeing how do we harness this power? Or on the flip side, how do we avoid being exploited by something like AI?
Both questions are essential, and tribal governments can look for ways to be more efficient. Maybe it's with farming. There are lots of ways that you could use this as a tool, but at the same time, being very protective of intellectual property and saying this is something we own and we need to keep it out of public discourse. I mean, there are things we know that are so sacred that should never be public, and that's going to be really important in this age.
Have you seen any reporting or any other further information that our viewers can find on AI, specifically in Indigenous communities or relating to Native people?
It's just starting to have a conversation. And I mean, we've seen how slow it's been to have a conversation in Indian communities about data and the primacy of data. And this is just an extension of that. So it's starting, but it's behind in terms of both the law and the application of the technology.